Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with us.
It's great to be here.
Today we're going to be talking about something really fascinating, the rise of the Black Power movement.
A very complex movement.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going beyond the typical civil rights narrative that a lot of people might already be familiar with and really kind of digging deeper.
Yeah, like what else is going on?
Yeah, into the kind of economic and ideological forces that maybe don't always get as much attention.
The undercurrents.
Exactly, the undercurrents. And we've got a great podcast episode to help us do that. It's called 90 Tapany, The Cold War, Poverty, and the Rise of Black Power, Why White America Held Back. So I think one of the things that surprised me, at least going into this, was learning how much the global political landscape really influenced what was happening with the Black Power movement.
Yeah, you can't really understand the rise of Black Power without understanding the Cold War.
Right, so let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
How did the Cold War, something that, on the surface seems like it's about international relations.
Yeah.
How did that actually end up hindering progress on racial equality here in the U.S.?
Well, it is kind of a paradox.
Yeah.
Because you think America, the land of the free home of the brave, should be all about equality.
Right.
But in reality, the Cold War created this intense fear of communism.
Right.
And that fear just kind of seeped into every aspect of American society.
Wow.
Even domestic policy.
Okay, so
It really colored how people viewed things.
even policies that, on the surface seem like they were genuinely trying to help Black communities were seen through this lens of suspicion almost.
Right. And especially anything that involved economic reform.
Oh, really?
Targeted towards Black Americans, that was just oh, that's socialism, that's communism.
Wow.
It's really unbelievable.
So you could be advocating for basic economic justice and be labeled a communist?
Oh, yeah. They were called communists all the time.
Wow, and that must have been so much.
It had a real chilling effect on progress.
Yeah, like you're trying to fight for basic fairness,
Yeah.
and suddenly,
You're the enemy.
yeah.
You're a communist.
Right, and it's not just rhetoric.
Right.
This had real consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look at Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty.
Right, which the War on Poverty was meant to lift all Americans out of poverty.
Yeah, exactly.
Regardless of race.
Right. But even that program faced resistance
Real.
because of this fear of communism.
Wow.
So programs like Medicare and Medicaid, which we still have today,
Yeah.
they were designed to provide health care to, the elderly and low-income families.
Right.
They were eventually passed,
Right.
but they were always facing funding challenges.
I see.
And, a lot of that came from this anti-communist sentiment.
It's like this fear of communism was so powerful that it even undermined efforts to address inequality that seemed like pretty common sense things. And then you add the Vietnam War into this mix.
Oh, yeah.
And things get even more complicated.
Way more complicated.
Because now you have this war that's just draining resources.
Yeah. Huge drain on the economy.
Right.
And people are starting to get resentful of social spending in general.
So on top of everything else, taxes are going up to fund the war.
Yeah. And a lot of white Americans just weren't on board with putting more money into domestic programs.
Especially ones that were targeted at helping Black Americans.
Right. So you've got this perfect storm brewing,
Right.
war draining resources. Public is wary of higher taxes and this deep fear of communism that basically paints any form of social welfare as a threat.
So it's no wonder that progress on racial and economic justice was just,
Crawling.
barely moving at all.
Yeah.
And this is where things start to get really interesting because all of this economic strain, this political anxiety, it starts to fuel a shift in how white Americans are viewing Black poverty.
Exactly.
Instead of looking at, the systemic factors that are at play.
The root causes.
Right. The idea of handouts starts to take root.
Right.
Black Americans are relying on government assistance instead of pulling themselves up by their bootstraps.
Exactly.
It's ignoring the systemic barriers that are keeping so many Black Americans trapped in poverty.
Yeah.
And just saying oh, this is a problem of personal responsibility.
Right. It's blaming the victim.
Yeah.
Instead of acknowledging that the system itself is rigged.
And it's a convenient way to kind of justify inaction and just maintain the status quo.
Totally.
And this is all being amplified by media portrayals that are often emphasizing stereotypes and personal failings rather than looking at the root causes.
Right.
So you've got economic anxiety, racial bias, a media landscape that's reinforcing harmful stereotypes.
It's a recipe for division.
Yeah. And resentment,
And it sets the stage for the emergence of Black power.
which really challenges the status quo.
Absolutely. It's a complete rejection of the existing power structure.
Right.
And that's what makes it so powerful and also so threatening to the establishment.
We're going to get into that more when we come back, but for now, let's take a quick break.
It's interesting, though, because like this whole handouts narrative, it didn't just come out of nowhere.
Right.
It was really rooted in this kind of prevailing social and political thought at the time, and this concept of like social Darwinism,
Okay.
which was really popular back then.
Right. So remind me, what is social Darwinism again?
Well, basically, it's this idea that you take the principles of like natural selection, right?
Survival of the fittest.
Exactly. And you apply it to like human society.
Oh, right.
So it basically says that, the people who succeed are just inherently like more capable or deserving,
Okay.
while those who struggle are like weaker or unfit.
So if you apply that to like racial inequality.
Right. It basically justifies the status quo.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, oh, well, if Black Americans are struggling,
Then it's their fault.
right, it's because they're just not as capable as white Americans.
Yeah.
And it completely ignores like the history of slavery, Jim Crow, ongoing discrimination.
All the systemic barriers
All of that.
that are actively preventing Black Americans from achieving equality.
It's just like, nope, it's their fault.
It's a really convenient way to just avoid taking any responsibility for the
yeah.
problem.
Yeah. And then Black Power comes along and it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
We reject that narrative.
Right. It's like a direct challenge to this idea of inferiority.
Absolutely. And demands self-determination.
So you've got this movement that's not asking for a seat at the table. They're saying, like, we're building our own table.
Exactly.
And this is happening against the backdrop of, like, deep economic inequality.
Yeah.
And this idea that Black Americans are somehow less deserving.
Right. It's like a powder keg.
And then to make matters worse, you have what's happening in urban areas across the country with, like, white flight.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other layer.
So explain that a little bit, because I think I've heard the term, but I don't really understand what it entailed.
So as Black families started moving into these predominantly white neighborhoods, often because they were fleeing like overcrowded, under-resourced areas,
Right.
a lot of white families started moving out to the suburbs.
Oh, okay.
They were afraid of declining property values or, a decrease in the quality of life or whatever.
But it wasn't just about individual choices, right?
No, it had like a huge ripple effect
Yeah.
on entire communities.
So what happened?
So urban historians have looked at this, and the data shows that as white families left, the tax base of these cities just plummeted.
Yeah.
And that led to like drastic cuts in public services.
So like schools, parks, infrastructure, all that stuff.
It all suffered.
So it's almost like this like self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
Where white flight leads to fewer resources, which then reinforces this idea that these neighborhoods are undesirable.
Exactly. And it just leads to more white flight.
Wow.
And all the while, white suburban communities are flourishing.
Right, with all the resources that are being taken away from the cities.
It was like a systematic draining of resources.
And it created this like stark contrast, right? Underfunded schools, crumbling infrastructure in Black urban communities.
Right.
And then you go to the suburbs and it's like pristine.
Yeah, it's like two different Americas.
Right. And all of this tension and inequality, it culminates in the 1967 urban riots,
Right, the uprisings.
which leads to the formation of the Kerner Commission.
Exactly.
So what do they have to say about all of this?
Well, they were tasked with investigating the root causes of these uprisings, and their findings were pretty insightful, even if they were largely ignored at the time.
So what did they conclude?
Basically, they said America was becoming two societies, one Black, one white, separate and unequal.
Wow.
And they pointed to the inadequate schooling, lack of job opportunities, deplorable housing conditions in Black ghettos.
So they were basically confirming what Black communities have been saying all along.
Yeah, they were like, look, this is systemic racism.
Right.
This isn't just a coincidence.
And it's not a problem of personal responsibility.
No, this is a problem with the system itself.
So what do they recommend?
But they called for massive investments in housing education, job training, community development programs.
It's basically like a complete overhaul of the system.
Yeah, pretty much.
And how did people react to that?
Not well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, despite like the urgency and the clarity of their warnings,
Yeah.
their recommendations were largely ignored.
Especially by white voters.
Yeah, for the most part, they just weren't willing to fund these initiatives.
It's like they looked at this report that basically laid bare the systemic racism at the heart of American society.
Yeah.
And they were just like, nah, Not our problem.
It's sad, but that's kind of what happened.
And it's this lack of action, this feeling of being unheard and unseen
Yeah,
that really fuels the rise of Black power.
absolutely. People were tired of waiting for change,
Yeah.
tired of empty promises, tired of being told to be patient,
And Black power offered a different path.
and said, you don't have to wait for the system to change. You can create your own power, build your own institutions, control your own destiny.
It's about self-reliance, self-determination, reclaiming your own narrative.
Exactly. And in a context where every system seemed designed to keep Black Americans down,
Yeah.
Black power offered a vision of empowerment and liberation.
And while it's often remembered for its more militant aspects,
Right?
it was also about fostering a sense of community,
Absolutely.
cultural pride, and economic self-sufficiency.
It was multifaceted,
Yeah.
encompassed everything from political activism to artistic expression to community organizing.
So it wasn't just about, like, protesting and fighting the system.
No, it was about building something new,
Reclaiming Black identity
celebrating Black culture.
and challenging those negative stereotypes.
It was a cultural awakening.
And that had a profound impact on American society.
Oh, absolutely.
It's impossible to imagine, like, hip-hop, for example,
Right.
without the influence of Black power.
It changed everything.
Yeah, and it's still shaping the conversation today.
For sure.
So we've talked about the political and economic context of the Black Power movement, but I think it's important to dig a little deeper into the different factions and ideologies within the movement.
Yeah, it wasn't just one monolithic thing.
Right. It was a really diverse movement with a lot of different perspectives.
We'll get into that after the break. Yeah, it was a really diverse movement with a lot of different perspectives.
So it wasn't just about, like, Black nationalism and separatism.
Not at all. I mean, those elements were definitely present.
Right.
But it was also about Black pride, self-determination, economic empowerment,
Right, reclaiming Black identity and challenging all those negative stereotypes
Yeah,
that had been imposed on Black people for centuries.
exactly.
And this is where figures like Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael come in.
Yeah, they really pushed the boundaries of what Black power could mean.
So Malcolm X, with his, like, fiery rhetoric and his critique of white supremacy,
Right, he was
they
uncompromising.
really captured the attention of a generation.
He did. He challenged the idea of integration as the ultimate goal.
Right.
And instead advocated for Black self-reliance and self-defense.
And then you have Stokely Carmichael, who's credited with popularizing the term Black Power itself,
Right, he was a key figure in SNCC.
the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Exactly.
Right.
But he grew increasingly disillusioned with the pace of change.
And the idea of appealing to white morality.
Yeah, he was like, we need to build our own power base, independent of white institutions.
So you had these influential figures who are really, like, pushing the conversation forward,
Right.
challenging the status quo, and demanding radical change.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, you had everyday people who were organizing in their communities, building institutions, creating a sense of, like, collective power.
It was a movement that was both intellectual and grassroots,
Yeah.
both revolutionary and deeply pragmatic.
Challenging systemic racism while also trying to create, like, tangible solutions
Exactly.
to the problems facing Black communities.
It's really incredible when you think about the lasting impact of this movement.
I mean, it's been decades since, like, the height of the Black Power era, but its influence can still be felt today.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, in so many ways.
Black power helped to reshape the cultural landscape in profound ways.
Yeah.
It paved the way for the Black arts movement
Right, which celebrated Black creativity.
and literature, music, visual art,
It influenced the development of hip-hop.
which emerged as a powerful voice for Black youth.
And it continues to inform conversations around racial justice and social equality today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that history isn't just a collection of dusty facts and figures.
Yeah.
It's a living, breathing force that shapes our present and our future.
It's a powerful message, and it's definitely something to think about.
We all have a role to play in shaping that future.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a really enlightening journey through a pivotal chapter of American history. And for you listening, we encourage you to continue exploring this topic because there's so much more to uncover.
Yeah. We've just scratched the surface.
And so much we can learn from the Black Power movement and its legacy.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.